So I'm going to introduce myself and then introduce the panel, and I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into some things about how biomechanics is used in Major League Baseball. Particularly, the title of what we're doing is how MLB teams utilize biomechanics big data. Scott, if I have questions, could we just have people ask them, or are you going to throw that thing around, or what? Okay. Oh, nice. You see my throwing mechanics, so okay. Anyway, we'll just ask some questions as we go along. Again, I'm Dr. Glenn Fleisig. I'm at the American Sports Medicine Institute. I'm the biomechanics director there. I'm also an advisor for Major League Baseball and the founder of the American Baseball Biomechanics Society, of which we're all members of. Megan, you were one of the founders with me, right? And so that's who I am. Why don't we start down there with Arnel? Why don't you introduce yourself, who you're affiliated with from Major League, as well as anything else you want to say.
Sure. Hi, my name is Arnel Aguinaldo. I am the director of the Biomechanics Lab at Loma, Nazarene University, where we partner with the San Diego Padres as their official biomechanics service provider.
Hey, I'm Will Vandenberg. I'm a staff research scientist with the Los Angeles Dodgers. I've been with the team since 2018, background in biomechanics, on the performance science team.
Hi, everyone. I am Megan Stewart. I am the lead strategist of movement solutions for the Milwaukee Brewers. So I oversee all of our biomechanics initiatives across the organization. This is my 5th season, and all of my background is also in biomechanics, sports science.
I'm Mike Sonne. I'm a pitching scientist with the Chicago Cubs, also an adjunct professor at Brock University. This is my 4th season with the Cubs, also co-founder of ProPlay AI. And my background's biomechanics, but a little more on the occupational side, so ergonomics.
Mike, why don't you just say ProPlay AI? I mean, I know what it is, but why don't you just tell them what that is that you found?
Oh, it is a single camera markerless motion capture system that focused primarily on pitching.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about. We'll go now from Mike to Arnel. We're going to go down. We each now know that they're with one particular major league team. The question I have for you is, how many people in your organization do biomechanics? Is it just it's a 3-part question, Mike. Is it just you, or do you have 2 people or 10 people? Also, what kind of equipment, technology do you have? And also, is it at your major league stadium, or is it at some your minor league stadiums? Tell us what's happening with you.
There's no chance I remember all the questions.
Okay.
So you may have to me again. So we're kind of interesting because like we essentially have no biomechanists and everyone's a biomechanist. Before I got there, I know we had some people that had worked directly in biomechanics, but we had kind of collected a lot of data and then let our analytics team and our engineers kind of use it with hypotheses fueled by our coaching staff. We've got Kinetrack systems in all of our affiliates at spring training here and at Wrigley. We use like a Vicon system on occasion, and we use like some of the ProPlay AI work for international scouting, amateur scouting, as well as drill work wherever we don't have a Kinetrack system. There's another one too, wasn't there?
Well, where is it located? Is it your major league stadium? Or?
Everywhere.
Yeah. Your minor league?
I did say that one.
Okay.
I did say that.
Oh, then you covered everything.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're similar to the Cubs in a way that we are very collaborative across all of our departments. So our baseball systems team and our research and development team, as well as myself, look at the biomechanics data. As for actual biomechanists, I am the only one in our organization with that background, but we work really closely with the individuals that can look at the data and then process it. We also use Kinetracks across the organization, Major League to our affiliates as well. I won't mention as many affiliates, but just, got to keep that secret a little bit. And then we have some other technology that we use if we don't have Kinetracks.
What? Okay. Well,
we're also collaborative like everyone else, but we have a number of biomechanists and haven't had people in the organization with biomechanics backgrounds for years. Megan, my boss, was hired, I think, in 2016 She's a PhD in biomechanics. So we've built up our team over a number of years. I think we now currently have 4 people with traditional biomechanics background. But yeah, a number of data scientists, analysts, and coaches who are well versed and educated in the biomechanics data sets that we have. Also, Kinetrac's team, had that for a number of years, but we utilize other markerless systems mostly, but markered as well, Hawkeye data as well, kind of whatever we can get our hands on. But Kinetrax is probably our primary. We have it at Dodger Stadium, a number of minor league stadiums as well, and it's growing into college and amateur data as well.
Yeah, ours is somewhat of a unique organization. I think within the Padres organization, we have close to, I would say, 6 or 7 members who with biomechanics background. I failed to mention as a professor at Point Loma Nazarene University, we're somewhat of a pipeline, if you will. We were just at spring training. We were there for last week. And correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor, my lab manager, I think we have 12 alums alone who are work full time for the Padres organization. Their background is in biomechanics, but they help out with the S&C, with athletic training. So it's multidisciplinary in that sense. And I think we're also lucky that our pitching coach, Ruben Niebla, has a kinesiology background. So he understands a lot of what we collect in the lab as well as at the stadium. We use Hawkeye at our Major League Club stadium and our affiliates. But in the lab, we have a Qualysys system. It's a hybrid system that's both marker-based and markerless for both pitching and hitting. And of course, all the force plate technology, AMTI, DELSIS, EMG, those kinds of things.
I just want to clarify a couple of things because you guys are not all biomechanists and we're throwing around some terms here. So I just want to talk about some of these companies we were talking about. We're talking about Kinetrax and Hawkeye. Just a show of hands. Does anyone know? Show of hands. Does anyone know what Hawkeye is? Essentially, kind of. Yeah. Okay. So almost everybody does. How about Kinetrax? Do you guys? Okay. About half the people on that. So Hawkeye is. You guys could correct me if I'm wrong, but Major League Baseball has a partnership with Hawkeye, and Hawkeye. Where's Clay? Where's Clay Nunley? I don't know where Clay is. Major League Baseball has a contract, has an agreement with Hawkeye, and there are Hawkeye stadium systems in every major league stadium, most minor league stadiums, and Hawkeye and Kinetrax both do the same thing. Back in the day, up until 5-10 years ago, biomechanics, which is tracking how people move, you have cameras and you put these little reflective dots all up and down the people's body. And then you usually did it inside a lab and you have special cameras. It's really the same technology used to make special effects for movies and for video games and everything. And you guys have seen it. The people wear the black suit and put little things on. That's what biomechanics was in baseball until so many years ago. And then these companies, Hawkeye, Kinetrax, a couple others, Simi came along, Dari, they came along and started doing markerless motion analysis. What that means is now we could collect data in game, not just bringing people into the laboratory. And so Hawkeye is the system that Major League Baseball first partnered with Hawkeye to track all the data that you guys know about, ball movement and stuff like that. Then Hawkeye expanded to also track biomechanics. Kinetrax has been a private company that also did that. Many major league teams have chosen to buy a Kinetrax and had both systems in. And then a few months ago, Sonne, who owns Hawkeye, also bought Kinetrax. So what the future looks like, none of us really know, but that's what those equipment things are. Okay. Again, anyone have any questions yet? Anyone? Okay. So now we're going to start back with Arnel and come back this way. Arnel, you were talking about your unique situation, but tell everybody with the Padres, are you guys, without any saying big secrets, are you trying to help the pitchers or the hitters or other activity like base running? What are you doing biomechanics with?
Everything, really. Yes, pitching, hitting, but anything that moves, really. I mean, we look at jumping, we look at running. Biomechanics is a tool. You know, it's not any different from what you're doing for your grip testing, your ball testing, performance tests that they do on the field. So the tool is only as good as those who are using it. So obviously pitching, because of its propensity for for throwing related injuries, but also hitting. We've got a hitting deck where we've got force platforms also instrumented with motion capture cameras. And we provide the data to our sports science team, make our interpretations, work with the rest of the staff to make decisions about player development as well as injury risk mitigation. So it's, just adds another layer of information on which decisions about player performance and injury risk can be made.
Yeah, we definitely do a little bit of everything, but most of our time is spent on pitching and hitting, where most of the value is in the sport, as I think most people in this room know. I myself spend most of my time on hitting these days because the hitters need help. Pitching is just so good, and our pitching development department is phenomenal. So we give them a lot of tools and support them, but they do a lot of the work on their own at this point. So yeah, a lot of my focus is on hitting, but we definitely do some base running and fielding, especially as Hawkeye has become more and more of a tool, tracking the movement of the fielders and base runners as well in game. But yeah, hitting needs help. So
I think the really cool thing about biomechanics over the last couple of years is that you can collect so much data that you don't always get to use it right away. And pitching has had the ability to have research published on it for many, many years, much more before hitting. And so they've just come so much further in the time that we've had this technology. With that being said, I think as with every team, pitching is probably the main focus of biomechanics with us as well. However, we do collect everything else. Just the time in which we might look at hitting or base running or functional movement screening might just be a little different, depending on the needs of that season or upcoming seasons. But yeah, pitching is a unique sport, a unique aspect of the sport because it's such a non-traditional movement that you're doing. That, if you can focus on that as well as help hitting, I think every organization needs help with hitting. So you kind of have to balance the two.
Yeah, I just do pitching now, but I know our organization works with every facet of the game using some form of biomechanics data, particularly like into some of the running and base running stuff now. That's been a big focus recently.
So when we're talking about analyzing pitching or hitting or base running, I want to talk a little about, and for your research is applicable also, what is really the mission or the goal? Mike, I'm going to start with you. Mike, I have 4 things. If it's too much, I'll give you the piece of paper and you can look at it. But like, which of these really do you guys focus on? He's looking at what I emailed him in advance. But really, are we trying to use biomechanics? I mean, instead of all saying everything, just maybe you guys do more than of one of these things than the other. But are we trying to improve the baseball players' performance? Or are we trying to improve their durability so they don't get hurt? Or are we trying to help our guy in rehab try to make it back? Or do you guys try to do some research and publish research? So Mike, maybe some of those you guys do, some of them you don't.
Everything.
Oh, come on. You're killing me.
No, I actually think like what's kind of exciting about biomechanics data right now is that it's the next wave of easy things for us to collect. It was ball flight before that. It was just velocity before that. Now that we have a lot of biomechanics data on every front, we can start tying it in like the other disciplines of kinesiology. And I kind of always reference this internally as like what our like movement science department has become is basically a kinesiology department. And where we tend to lose focus on some of the biomechanics data, particularly when we've only looked at it in like an analytics lens, is like those numbers are made by a bag of meat with electricity running through it that sometimes gets mad at you. And those other parts of things, the psychology of it, the physiology of it, their motor control, all of those things are really important in context. And with that in mind, like, I think all of those, the 3 things, the return to play, return to performance more than return to play, I would say, injury prevention and durability and overall performance, they're all hand in hand. I think people very traditionally have thought of them as 3 separate pillars, but they're all the same concepts, really.
Yeah, I think Arnel kind of touched on this earlier, but biomechanics in my mind, is just a tool. It's a contextual tool that you can provide to every other department, whether that's the rehabilitation department, the athletic training department, player development, S&C, any of the departments to help make the player the best that they can be, whether that's returning from an injury, whether that is just performing at the highest level of what we think they can do internally. I think the return to performance is probably a forefront runner just because that is the most optimal thing that we can do on a daily basis where you can see on-field performance in a game, both pitching and hitting. But I do think, to like what Mike said, is that everything goes hand in hand, and the psychological aspect of the player plus the nutritional aspect of the player is influential in the actual like biomechanics, because if they're not taking the right supplements, they're not eating what they need coming back from rehab, then it's not solely the biomechanics job to try and get them back on the field. So everything goes into effect to try and make them the best that they can be.
Definitely agree with what's been said. We focus a lot on the improving performance side of it. Injury prevention is a really hard question that we don't have the answers to, and maybe one day we will have some answers to that. But in the meantime, we're going to focus on getting our players as good as possible for when they are healthy. And yes, optimal performance probably leads to healthier mechanics, but in the meantime, we're just going to try and make our players as good as possible. So our department kind of has two sides to it: the reporting, working with our coaches to make our younger players better and keep our major league players performing at their peak. And then we have our research side, which I focus on. Everyone kind of does a little bit of both, but we then have our long-term research where we're trying to answer the questions that have been asked for decades, for all of baseball history, probably, about what makes players good, what makes a hitter good, what makes a pitcher good. Everyone in this room works on, projecting what makes a player or who's going to be the best. And there's always some discrepancy, right, between what we think is going to happen and what actually happens. And so we're trying to answer those questions of like, why did that player underperform? Why did that player overperform? And then just keep applying it with our coaches to keep making our players better.
Yeah, I agree with everyone on this panel of how biomechanics is a tool, tool in your tool shed, if you will. I think for us, what's unique about our lab is that we're, as a facility at an academic institution, where our primary goal is research. We want to disseminate the data, of course, with limitations about, contextualized data, things like that. But we want to be out there. Our grad students are coming to the lab. Our focus is to make sure that they finish and defend their thesis and present this at conferences and publish in academic journals, right? That's the only way we can evolve as a field, as a science. On the player development side, I think for us, a lot of the lab over the years is learning from the coaches, learning from the clinicians, the ATs and PTs, and what they're looking at for individual players, because it is individualized. Every player is different, for whether it's a pitcher or a hitter, and understanding what they're looking at. For a while, as a young biomechanist, I had to instill in me what they were talking about. I had to translate with things like hip-shoulder separation and scap load. As a biomechanist, as a gross anatomist, that didn't make sense to me at all. But I knew what they're talking about from a biomechanical perspective and be able to speak their language, so that that's the only way that you'll get the buy-in. You get the buy-in from the players, from the coaches, that all of this data, it actually means something. It's actionable that they can improve upon. And I remember one of the first meetings we had, this is way before we had the lab, we were working at spring training. We're doing it every year. And we'd sit down in a room, and it was a group of 30 of us that involved with sports science on the major league side. And we go over each individual player in the biomechanics group, just a small group. We present our data. And then next up was S&C, athletic training, and put it all together and make good decisions, informed decisions about the plan for the next 3 months or 4 months, whatever that may be. So it's a learning process, and, we pick up things here and there and try to understand, as a biomechanist, what we feel would be helpful and make recommendations. But I always go in and I tell every student don't be a coach. You're not a coach. You're not a pitching expert or a hitting expert. You're a biomechanist. Provide the information and then give your contributions. Hopefully, it'll benefit the player in the long run.
You guys you said a lot of things that led to other thoughts, but Megan, you got something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to echo something Arnel said about publishing research at an academic institution. That's your primary goal, which is really helpful when teams can't really publish research on our population. And then also to what Will said about injury prevention is an extremely hard task, because if you think about pitching, they're throwing a baseball 100 miles per hour, sometimes quicker than that, and it's just not a natural movement. So trying to be able to predict that injury and then prevent that injury is probably going to take a lot longer time than just what we've had so far.
So on that note, so again, just to clarify, Arnel, you get your day job is working at the university. And so you, as I know, has published a lot of papers scientifically. But Mike and Megan and Will, you guys are employed by your teams. And so just yes or no, I mean, basically you guys do research, but it's for internal use and it's not for publishing, or am I wrong, Mike?
I think we're probably a little more open to the idea of publishing things now than maybe has been in the past. And this is, I don't know, I'm just, you know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to talk about stuff. All the adults are in Japan. They can't get mad at me right now. So, so when I did my PhD, it was funded by an organization called US CAR. And what it was like the domestic auto manufacturers pooled money for what they viewed as non-competitive issues. And obviously health is a competitive thing in baseball. But the way that like teams have done with like collaborating on data and that, like I could see a future, particularly with this like MLB injuries report coming out, where like teams maybe do move towards working together to publish something if we can keep a better product on the field. Like that's kind of a future I could see in that world. I know, when I first started, they were very against me like going and doing any form of public speaking because I tend to just say whatever I want to all the time. But that's been a lot more receptive, and I still hold my adjunct status and I publish work there all the time. I think as the field gets more all-encompassing across baseball, that's a possibility. But I would say that like if I find something that's like really, really an advantage for us, that's definitely stays in-house. But I think there's broader things, and particularly data that could be shared with the greater population like here that can help move things forward in the future.
How about you, Megan? Do you guys just do an internal research, or you have any openness to publishing things?
Yeah, I think right now it's internal. I think more from the perspective of if we find things, we'd like to keep them in-house. But I could see a world, especially on the biomechanics front, where we all pretty much know each other and we talk on a somewhat consistent basis anyway, that the information that you're getting from Hawkeye or Kinetrax is the same for every team. It's just how you utilize that information that's different based on your team's mission or what they're trying to accomplish that season. So I do see a possible world in the future where you could share certain information based on what it is.
Well, how about you guys with the Dodgers?
Yeah, we keep things pretty internal, open to future collaborations, especially in the injury front. Like, yeah, I agree. That's mutually beneficial to everyone. Especially one of the big blockers of the injury is just knowing who's actually injured. So like if we could share that information better, that would be helpful. But yeah, most of what we find is, especially on the performance improvement side, is kept internally. We don't publish anything.
So I go to a lot of medical meetings also, sports medicine, doctors and physical therapists and everything like that. And it's a little different what's happening there. So the doctor from one of these teams could be at one of these medical meetings talking about his new way he's doing Tommy John surgery, or the physical therapist can be talking. So the medical staff, first of all, the medical staff is often not employed by the team, but the medical staff, they're a private doctor, but they share information pretty regularly at medical meetings. So again, I could see this going there. And the other thing, the other analogy is in the medical field, I don't know if you guys know this, but Major League Baseball about maybe 10 years ago started what's called the HITS system, HITS, which stands for Health Injury Tracking System. That sounds about right. So it used to be, injury stuff used to be like how you guys are saying biomechanics is now. It used to be that the Chicago Cubs or Milwaukee Brewers had their injury history and that he had this sprain or he had this broken this and that. And then when you traded a player or whatever, you didn't know. But Major League Baseball across the system put in an electronic injury tracking system. So now when a player gets traded, minor league player, even from this organization to that, it's this continuity where you know his records. And also research can be done where people can say, I want access to all of MLB's data, anonymous, the team doctors, and then they could say 45% of the people have this type of injury or this type of injury takes this long. So I could see biomechanics, now that Major League Baseball is kind of collaborating the biomechanics data collection, I could see where this comes. Brian, standing over there, Brian Kenny was talking about what makes a winning team or a losing team. And that reminded me of something that you four just said. You were talking about how sometimes you give data to the performance people or sometimes to the coaches. I've been around a lot of major league teams, and I think one of the things that makes a winning team versus a losing team is some teams have great interdisciplinary communication, and some teams have really sucky communication where the coaches don't know what the strength coaches are doing and they don't know what the doctors are doing. But the winning organizations, I think, have better communication. So from a biomechanics point of view, it's a tricky field. So I want to talk about, we'll start here with Mike. When you get the data, I don't remember if we're going this way or this way, but I'm just starting here. When you get the data, talk a little about who do you get the biomechanics data to? Do you get it to the coach, to the player, to the team physical therapist? And how does that communication, because as Arnel was saying, and Megan also, biomechanics is really a tool. It's just like an MRI machine. It's getting some data of the person, but now we got to get it to the person who could apply it. So Mike, tell us a little about what's happening with the Cubs that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're aware of trying to not internally cue somebody too much by showing them, like a player, too much biomechanics data, constantly all the time and inundating them with it. But yeah, our internal system kind of conveys that information, makes it easily accessible to all of our medical staff, our performance staff, all of our coaches. And then if there's goals for a player, that's something that can be displayed to them as well. So I'd say comparatively, that's probably the best way that it's used with the players. Show them, this is what you did here, this is what you did here. You see how that's different, and then design drills around something like that. But yeah, I'd say the internal systems kind of standardize the way we display data, but you see what you need to see.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that all parties, departments are involved in the process of the biomechanics data. Most of the time, if you're seeing something on this end, they're probably also seeing it in the weight room or in the training room and in some front. So like having a conversation with the strength staff and the medical staff or your high performance staff, your sports scientist staff is, I think, really informational, just so that you guys have a better picture of like what you're looking at. And then understanding from the player development side, like what are they working on? Have they changed anything? Just getting better context of maybe what you're seeing. And then some players really want to see information. Some players don't want to see any information. So I think knowing who you're talking to and then the overall goal of like, what does the organization want them to improve on? What are they trying to work on? And making sure that if you are messaging it and how you're messaging it is tailored towards that specific thing is also really important.
Yeah, most of our information gets delivered to the coach, which then delivers to the player because they have much more context of how he's feeling, if he's going through something at home, all the little things that can affect him. But we've done a really good job of integrating our performance science staff with our coaching staff, our player development and major league. Myself and one of my coworkers, actually, we started on the player development side. So my first year, I was on the Arizona League coaching staff. And that just helped us kind of build relationships with our coaches. I'm very close with a lot of our coaches, and we've been lucky to have some pretty good continuity over the past few years to build up those relationships. So they trust us to talk to the players too. And I think another thing that is sometimes unique across different organizations is we emphasize that the data is open to the players whenever they want to see it come in. And so players are often asking to see it themselves too. Varies from player to player. Some guys want nothing to do with it. Some guys want to see every graph and every number. So we're open to it. We'll talk them through it as much as they want, but generally we go to the coach because they have just more context than we do to deliver it at the right time in the right messaging. But as Arnel said earlier, you got to definitely speak the same language and speak to them in terms that they'll understand and not overwhelm them.
Yeah, the coaches are really good about translating a lot of this data. We want to avoid, paralysis by analysis. And so, I mean, we collect hundreds of kinematic and kinetic data points, and a lot of it's not relevant. So it's more like an appendix. Yeah, we've got their report. It's there if they need it, if they want it. Some players want to see their skeleton. And that's probably the only one thing they want to see. Some of them are a little more educated and say, hey, I want to see how did my ground reaction force look on the backside and front side during that swing, for example. But at the end of the day, it's up to coach to kind of filter, translate that information. Like Will said, they have context. They're with them every single day, working with them, and they know what works and what doesn't, and what could change possibly, and what can be valuable. But the data is there. I think it's always if they want it, and I think a lot of the younger players today tend to be more, I guess, technically, savvy. And, a lot of them won't even pitch without a TrackMan. They'll wait for the TrackMan to get there. It's the same here. So yeah, so I think that they see the value as long as we don't inundate them with all that information, with all that data.
Yeah, I'd have to say that I think the best way to go is what you guys were alluding to, which is we give the information to the coaches and the coaches do their job and help the players. There are players who want to see it, but I think it works better when the coach understands the biomechanics and then they try to work with the player. But that's what I think. Okay, Will, I'm going to start with you here because when we put this panel together, I think you gave me this phrase, but we want to talk about how MLB utilizes biomechanics big data. And I want to talk about big data here because, again, back in the day when I put markers on, which I still do, put markers on some pitchers, we have data on 10 people throwing 10 pitches, but now we have hundreds of people throwing thousands of pitches. So I'll start with you, Will. How do we as biomechanists take such volume of big data and make it usable?
Yeah, the quantity of data that we have is unbelievable. Probably in, I don't know, a month we have as much data that's captured in every lab in the country or something like that. I'm taking a wild guess there, but I think there's a lot that comes along with that, right? It's in-game data, so it's not a controlled environment. You have to keep in mind all the context, what pitches were thrown, how many pitches the pitcher has thrown, the game situation for the hitter, what his objective is in that at bat. A lot of things can impact the movements that we're seeing on the fields. So that's like key to keep in mind. There's been a lot of cool research done in the public already on bat speed with 2 strikes versus first pitch and at bat and how much that can differ. Yeah. So that's key. You got to take that into consideration. There's a lot of like data engineering work, obviously, to handle all of that data to be able to process it and turn it around. But I think one of the great things about it is there are so many ways to be successful in baseball, and with our huge data set, you can really see how many different strategies work. If we were limited to just 10 players, you could potentially make a conclusion that was biased just because of the sample that you had. And there's a lot of times where we'll start doing research on some subset of players and it looks like there's some kind of relationship. And then when you add in the full population, you realize that that just broke down and, oh, there's actually 5 different ways, or you sort it and you have Mookie Betts at the top and then you have Mike Trout at the bottom. And it's like, well, That clearly is not the sole driver of performance. So yeah, there's just a lot of information that hopefully everyone in this room can help us understand.
I think your
eventually.
message here is not just for biomechanics, it's for all analytics data. You guys analyze data on 10 people and try to conclude on everybody. It might not work out the same, the conclusions, if you analyze more people. Megan, you want to talk about big data?
Yeah, I'm really lucky. I work with a great research and development staff and baseball systems staff that help ingest all of this data and clean the data and make it usable so that I can do my job successfully. I think one of the things that I've specifically learned about the massive amount of data that we have coming in now is that it's not all clean. Different stadiums have different camera setups. If it's windy in San Francisco versus in Milwaukee when we're inside, that affects the data quality. If you move down the minor leagues, lighting affects it. So stadiums that have open and closed roofs, stadiums that are just all outside, day games versus night games. I think all of that is a challenge that I'm really happy we have really, really smart people in our organization that can help me decipher that.
Mike, you want to go next?
City Connect jerseys that have dark pants. Certain teams that maybe use the wrong camera systems in their minor league affiliates.
Or yellow hats.
Yeah, all these things. Yeah. No, I think the one thing that makes the amount of data we have really interesting is that typically if you had a lab, you get somebody in maybe in spring training, they had to go to Arizona, that you get another sample there and then another sample at the end. Like with what you're saying about how much it can change park to park too, like being able to look at every pitch and seeing changes, that's been some of the more interesting ways, I think, to look at the data too.
Arnel, you got anything to add here?
Yeah, I think from a big data perspective, we have to be cognizant of a couple of things. One, obviously, is overfitting, right? That's always an issue. And number one is with biomechanics data, there's a lot of interdependence between variables, between kinematic and kinetic variables. And so it's not a safe assumption that they're independent. So I think it's
Arnel, sorry, just define what kinematics and kinetics mean.
Sorry. So kinematics is like the geometry of motion, like what you see right away when a player is pitching a ball or swinging a bat. The kinetics are the forces and torque, the muscular forces and torque, gravity that cause or change that motion that you see. And so we estimate these things in the lab or, in game with Hawkeye or Kinetrax. And a lot of them are related. They're kind of built off each other, right? It's called scaffolding and use a number of complicated models to estimate what these are. And so we run into issues where you get cross-contamination, we call crosstalk between variables in our models. And what Megan said about noise, that's a huge issue depending on the system that you're using. So just being cognizant of what the data is and what you can get out of it ultimately will help you. But it's good that we've got, these high sample sizes that we can use both between players and within players to potentially build a model that we can trust and make decisions on.
Yeah. Will said, we've said a couple of things about, we want to make sure with so much data also that the quality of the data, and for any type of analytics, you worry about the quality of data. Will, I don't know if you want to say just 1 minute about what we're doing with ABBS, about standards, what we're trying to do.
Yeah, we're trying to put together a standards and recommendations for research document that will go through from the start of your research question to designing what equipment's needed for it and all the considerations if you're collecting the data yourself, to then on the analysis side, some kind of standard recommendations for how to process data, how to clean the data, suggestions, and at the very least, encouraging people to document how they do it and publish how they clean the data and how they calculated all the different variables that they're including in their research. So in the works right now, but to come.
So if you guys love this stuff like we do, the American Baseball Biomechanics Society, I'll talk about it tomorrow. It's welcome to anyone who wants to join that. Now, I think I want to throw this thing. So I don't even care if you have a good question. I want to throw this. Does anyone have any question? Here you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Addie. I'm a master's student studying biomechanics at University of Massachusetts. My question is, every time that I have talked about bringing ideas about EMG and neuromuscular control into baseball, it's kind of like shot down. It's like, that's too complicated. That's too impractical. The data is really messy. I just wanted to know, I don't know how much you can share, but what are your individual opinions or maybe your team's opinions on moving into that realm?
Just hold it. Okay. Anyone have any comments about using EMG?
Yeah,
And-
yeah.
Well,
Research-
sorry. Let me just clarify for everyone what EMG is electromyography, which is like EKG or EEGs. It's basically for muscles. You put these stickers, these connections on your muscle. And then when your muscle fires, like my big guns here, when your muscles fire, then it shows how much you're using that muscle. And so what we're doing with motion analysis in biomechanics is we're seeing the motion, but as Arnel was saying, we're kind of calculating how much force is in the joint, but we're not really measuring how much each muscle is being done. So you were kind of alluding to EMG. And EMG is much more difficult to collect data because the things fall off and the quality of the data. But that as a background, Arnel, are you guys using EMG at all? Or
Not for player development, but definitely for research. And you can always recruit collegiate and minor league players for those research projects that are IRB approved. And then you've got data that you could potentially show the coaches, maybe the big league guys to say, look, this could be informative and potentially send someone, especially if they're rehabbing from an injury to the lab that has the ability to do EMG. Obviously, it's not very practical to use, for in stadium uses, at least not at the moment. There may be some musculoskeletal model down the road where you could probably estimate what that is, but I think from a research standpoint and like what Glenn alluded to earlier, the lab, at least in our perspective, is much like an MRI center. It's not for everybody, but if there are special cases in which a player may benefit from the, three-dimensional electromyography analysis of their movement, then some coaches and especially our athletic trainers and S&C folks would send them over and get them kind of a full eval from there.
any other thoughts about EMG or stuff like that?
Yeah, I'll always take a chance to use my favorite academic quote of all time about EMG, the electromyography is a seductive muse. It's such like an interesting concept that you're getting into actually how a motor pattern is forming. But the reality is, right, like this, if you're looking at something in pitching, like somebody's just moving so fast and so much of that signal is going to be compromised by the movement or, where is that electrode over the muscle belly or the neuromuscular junction? There are some new cool technologies. There's a company called Oro Muscles that has been like including some AI and also IMUs into that. And I know Delsys does the same thing with the IMU. And I think that can give you some needed context. It is just, it's a challenge, but it is, I've used EMG my whole career and don't do a lot of it now, but it's always got some no catch. Yeah. So.
Oh, sorry.
10 grade command. Yeah.
This is the time of year where we hear everybody saying they're in the best shape of their life. Do you ever think we'll get to a point where somebody will come in and say they're moving the best of their life? Do you feel like some of your athletes are listening enough and understand enough to really make those necessary changes?
People say crazy stuff all the time, Will. So, yeah.
I work with you like
Yeah, I know. I think that's definitely feasible, particularly when you can quantify energy flows and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
So as those numbers become more accessible to people, I'm sure you could see that, but let the rest of the group say.
Yeah, we've had players come in and say that foursome just felt good, right? And based on their metrics from their TrackMan data, yeah, it looks good. It's got good stuff, et cetera. But from a biomechanics standpoint, what does that mean? And so we capture that, and our coaching staff are really good about identifying those 3 or 4 bullet points in the report is saying on this day, on this specific types of pitches, whether it's fastball, off speed, or breaking ball, it felt good. Biomechanically, this is how it looked. Let's maybe use that as a reference point. And, as we go down the season, if they get hurt, or if their velo goes down, whatever, then we can potentially use that as a reference.
Well, one of the things, one of the things is with the new big data, we could also look to see if someone gets hurt, what they looked like before they got hurt, and then what might have led to the injury. But also, if they're rehabbing, you have a baseline what they're trying to get back to. Likewise, if someone goes into a slump, batting, pitching, whatever, you could always try to look back at their old data. So that's one of the benefits of new biomechanics. We only have a few minutes left, so. Okay, we have other questions. So you have the thing. Do you have a question or you just want to throw it?
I'm interning here. I'll be.
Someone raise their hand and someone throw it and throw to someone.
Hello, my name is Klaus. I'm a neuroscientist, master's student at the University of Waterloo. I'm in the kinesiology department, so luckily I understand most of what you're saying. The hitters needing help, I'm looking at eye tracking right now, and most of the papers are being published in Japan. Can't really find any stuff from the major league teams. But what are you guys doing to implement eye tracking and eye movements to help the hitters?
Yeah, we've tested eye tracking, used it a little bit for sure. I think you're not seeing because we don't publish. Teams don't publish, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, such a large part of hitting is obviously the seeing the ball and the perception of the hitter. So there's a lot of research to do there. A lot of the research that exists so far in hitting is on mechanics and movements, but that's just a small portion. The decision-making aspect of hitting is a big portion of it. So yeah, there's a lot of room for more research in eye tracking and just perception in general.
Okay, another rapid question. You want to throw it? You can throw it over here.
I'm gonna help out my fellow Canadian here for
Oh,
one
good,
second, but
good.
if you can figure out how to use eye tracking and apply it with a lot more context, I think you could make a really nice career for yourself in that. So.
Yeah, thanks. A comment was made earlier that performance optimization might actually help with injury prevention. And I think that's true until it isn't. Obviously, we've got hyper-competitive players who are always pushing to the limits, and they're going to go up to the point and beyond where the physical body starts breaking down. How do you reel players in and try to put bounds on them so that they don't necessarily push to that point and keep them on the injury prevention side so that they're not overextending?
I am not the athletic trainer or physical therapist, so I think my pushback is that if we reel them in, do we know he's going to stay healthy? And the answer is no. I agree. As the Dodgers, for those of you who followed, we have had a lot of injuries in the past couple of years, so you definitely can push guys past the limit, and we're working hard to keep players healthy, but it's kind of also hard to tell a guy to reel it in when they're trying to make the major league team and trying to establish themselves as a major leaguer. So that's not my job.
I think too, if we as an organization try to reel them in and we stop trying to make pushes with them, they will go outside and do it elsewhere. So it's almost better to know what is going on and what they're doing and how much they're doing to try and at least help regulate it on the back end if you can.
I was really hoping you guys were going to say that you were reeling your players in. Yeah, no, I think like the reality there is that we're probably past the limit of safety, and that probably happened 50 years ago. There is one 100% way to keep your elbow from getting hurt, and it's don't throw a baseball. So I think like what Megan was saying, tracking as many data points as possible and understanding how capacity is changing is probably your best bet in that context.
This might be a perfect time for a shameless plug. Next Sunday, we're having a special webinar with SABR as well as ABPS on the MLB Injuries in Baseball report, and Glenn Fleisig is on the panel. I'll be moderating. So it might be a good opportunity for you to learn a little bit more of what, what's been going on and potentially what can be done other than, telling a thrower to stop throwing, which is obviously not a thing, but also maybe de-emphasizing velo. I mean, velocity, both from a hitter standpoint and from a pitcher standpoint. But there's still a lot of work. I think with the big data stuff, we could probably borrow a page from epidemiology and start doing these, case control type of studies and understand, injury versus non-injured, and, those who have this certain biomechanical risk factor, those who don't, and really understand the absolute and relative risk factors of these players. But to answer your question, it's a fine line between performance enhancement and injury. I don't even like to use the word prevention. It's more like injury risk reduction, if you will.
So yes, as Arnel is saying, I don't know, Scott, I guess everyone will get you've advertised it, but is everyone get an email about it, or? Everybody who's here will get it. Everyone here will get an email about the details, about the Zoom link. It's a webinar a week from this Sunday night, 90-minute webinar about the MLB report and the pitching injuries and injuries. I'm also talking tomorrow about this time here about the Tommy John injuries in particular. So let's give that a throw to someone else for one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap this up in a few minutes. Okay.
Hi, I'm Serene. I'm from the University of the Pacific.
So can you speak in a little louder?
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm Serene. I'm from University of the Pacific. And I just had a question. I think our Professor Arnel has mentioned about the movement. What are the challenges exist when where biomechanics data can be applied to the team-based where the movements are highly unpredictable? How can you apply the biomechanics?
Sorry, can you repeat that? There was a truck, like literally.
So what are the challenges that exist in applying the biomechanics data to the team-based where the movement is highly unpredictable or dynamic?
Where the movement is
Highly unpredictable.
highly unpredictable. Hitting is a perfect example of that. And I've been asked many times, what's the perfect biomechanical model for hitting to compare it to? I go, it doesn't exist. I mean, we have one player on our team who has the slowest bat speed in all of Major League Baseball, who won the batting title last year, right? And it's such a reactionary movement that you can't really pinpoint per se. Now there are certain like ground reaction force and maybe some kinetic variables that we can use to quote unquote predict. But really it's a case by case, type of analysis, if you will.
So biomechanics historically works best for the repetitive action that's an action, not a reaction, such as walking or running or a golf swing or a baseball pitch. You're doing the same thing. But baseball batting or some other things that are reactive or tennis ground stroke, it's really challenging because the movements vary so much. That's kind of what you were saying here, right?
I'll add too real quick is what are you optimizing for in hitting, right? If you build a model that's optimizing for bat speed, they're going to probably like swing straight down and either not make contact or hit the ball straight into the ground. So then, okay, are you optimizing for making contact? That's going to result in a extremely low bat speed with no power. Are you optimizing for hitting the ball in the air? That might reduce your So, right, there's all these like balanced weights that you need to consider that make it a really difficult problem and create the environment for a lot of different strategies to be successful.
Okay, so we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask the panel for the closing thoughts each.
No, I want to see somebody pull down and throw that thing all the way up there.
You got it, hand up.
Oh, yeah.
He has
Let's
his
get
hand up.
the orange hat way back there.
Go for it.
Let's see a running gun.
The orange hat.
Yeah, do it. There you go. All the way up.
Pretty good.
Like
that's
all the way.
Will, does it feel like Dodger Stadium with the
There
beach
you
balls here? Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
stuff.
After all, I feel like I have to come up with a great question. So if I don't, apologies in advance. My question is, what's the greatest success story in the baseball biomechanics universe? Like, what's the one story that everyone uses to prove the value of having a biomechanics team? And then what are your personal greatest successes in your current role? So Arnel, it wouldn't surprise me, for example, if you're, and no offense, Michael, if your greatest success story might be Jeremiah Estrada, who was a middling pitcher, and then he struck out 13 straight batters last year. So yeah, something along those lines.
Well, I can't name names, but I will tell you, a lot of times when coaches send players to the lab, it's about confirming what they see. They already know what's going on with a pitcher, or, they're dropping a glove, or they're tilting a certain way. And they're waiting for us to see what they're seeing from a three-dimensional perspective. So if we include in the bullet point, it's almost like confirmation bias at that point. And there are success stories, if you will, but it's not just because of the lab, right? It's, I mentioned earlier, it's interdisciplinary. The coaches are making decisions ultimately, and the players also have to buy in on what's being provided to them. So we're a very small piece of the puzzle, and for many years, I've always tackled with the sense that biomechanics is not a black box. It's not an easy button where, okay, all of a sudden our injuries are going to go down. It's just a tool. And, hopefully someday we can have more, control type of research that can say, I think Glenn, you might have done this before, where the integration of biomechanics and clinical decision-making, which is done on the gait analysis side. Potentially that could be done on the baseball side, who knows? And to see really what is the value in coaching decision-making with the integration of biomechanics.
Okay, so we only have a few more minutes. So I want to ask each of the three of you to either answer his question or just give a closing thought, whatever you prefer to do.
I'd say like the coolest thing I've seen is just that people are speaking the language of biomechanics now. I think that's when you truly see like an idea has propagated, is when people they don't know where it came from, but they just speak in that. Greatest personal accomplishment, not to brag too much, but I got moved out of the front office and into player development in uniform this year. And we signed a guy that throws a knuckleball, and I had to play catch with him, and I didn't die.
I think one of the greatest accomplishments I've seen with my time with the Milwaukee Brewers is just the overall understanding of this space from when I started to where I am now, with the players, the coaches, on-field staff, everybody involved at least knows about it and is interested in it. And it's really rewarding when players come up to you and ask you for further explanation on X, Y, or Z based on something that a pitching coach or hitting coach may have told them. And I think that just goes to show that the overall social media of it, plus the feedback that you're providing internally, or the education that you're providing internally is working. I'm also in player development, but I don't wear a uniform, so I'm going to have to take that one back to my boss.
Yeah, go High Sox. You got to go High Sox.
They had much better answers than I had planned, so I'm going to second that. When I first started, we had to translate everything to SCAP load, like Arnel was talking about. And now we're at the point where our pitching coaches say, "Oh, you mean horizontal abduction?" It's now it's cool to use these biomechanics terminology, and that I missed that one apparently. I think I'm just gonna name names, whatever. James Outman was drafted my first year, and we worked really hard with our coaching staff to overhaul his swing and completely retrain some movement patterns, and got him to the big leagues. Was a 4-WAR player, working hard to get him back to that. But that was pretty cool to track my career and have touch points with him throughout his career and help get him there.
Yeah, anything else, Arnel?
Well, other than Glenn, I'm probably the oldest one here on this panel. So I'm old enough to remember when coaches used to call biomechanics biometrics all the time. And it was tough for me coming out of grad school, trying to sell, hey, the sports biomechanist. And they were like, no, we don't need that magic biometric stuff. But now, fast forward how many years, it's evolved to such a state because of markerless motion capture, for example, where biomechanics is in every aspect of the game. It is not just in baseball. I mean, you've probably heard about the NBA. Every NBA organization is getting an NBA biomechanics lab. And guess what? They need people to run those systems. systems, to run them. And it's very important. And I've seen some college programs make the mistake of buying a system without hiring the staff to run them. They say, oh, we can run it ourselves.
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
so they need trained personnel, trained young biomechanists, young analysts to not only collect the data, but to make the interpretation and translate it over to the player development guys.
And because I have the podium, I'm going to end with two answers to your question, part one and part two. So I'm old, as Arnel pointed out. I started ASMI in 1987 with Dr. Andrews. And in the 90s, we were just analyzing baseball pitchers. We were the only biomechanics lab doing this. We were analyzing pitchers to try to make them, we were analyzing the injured guys trying to come back. And then in 2002, we said, let's flip this and try to do injury prevention. And Rick Peterson, who was the pitching coach of the Oakland A's, brought these two unknown kids, Tim Hudson and Barry Zito, to our lab. And we analyzed them and then gave Rick Peterson the feedback, and Barry Zito won the Cy Young Award. And I think that put biomechanics on the radar for the teams that this thing works. So I think that was my first proud moment there. And then my second one is just 5 years ago, we noticed that biomechanics was not just in the ASMI lab in Birmingham, it's becoming something. So we started this ABBS, and we have, what are Megan's, like 700, or now like 700 members or something like that. And I'm really proud that
750.
biomechanics is a profession in baseball. So with that, why don't we thank our panel of Major League biomechanists.